The autumn mist that clung to the grounds of Ravenscroft Manor on that fateful evening seemed to carry with it an air of foreboding, as though nature herself had conspired to provide the perfect backdrop for the drama that was about to unfold. The great house, with its Elizabethan bones and Georgian additions, rose from the Hampshire countryside like something from a Gothic romance, its mullioned windows glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. Within the oak-panelled drawing-room, the atmosphere was charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. Lady Diana Ravenscroft, the celebrated hostess whose beauty and mysterious past had made her a fixture in both society pages and scandal sheets, stood before the assembled company with the bearing of a woman accustomed to commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying that faint trace of continental accent that had never quite disappeared despite 20 years in England, "I present to you the jewels of the Red Duchess." The velvet-lined case she opened with a theatrical flourish contained a collection that drew gasps from even the most jaded members of her audience. The centerpiece was a necklace of extraordinary beauty, rubies the color of fresh blood, each stone perfectly matched and surrounded by diamonds that caught the firelight like captured stars. Beside it lay matching earrings, a tiara that might have graced the head of an empress, and a brooch in the shape of a phoenix, its wings spread wide in eternal flight. "Magnificent!" breathed Sir Marcus Thornbury, the art dealer whose expertise in precious objects was matched only by his reputation for acquiring them through questionable means. His pale eyes, magnified behind gold-rimmed spectacles, studied each piece with the intensity of a lover. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. 18th century Russian work, I would say, possibly from the workshop of Jeremiah Possier himself." "You're quite correct, Sir Marcus," Lady Ravenscroft replied with a smile that held secrets. "They belong to the Duchess Irina of Varenska, known as the Red Duchess for both her political sympathies and her preference for these particular stones. She smuggled them out of Russia during the Revolution, and they have had quite an adventurous history since then. Colonel James Ashworth, Lady Ravenscroft's brother-in-law, and a man whose military bearing had never quite concealed his financial difficulties, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Adventurous history," he repeated. "That's one way of putting it. The newspapers have been full of hints about stolen imperial treasures and mysterious deaths in Paris." "The newspapers," interjected Miss Vivian Hartley, Lady Ravenscroft's companion and secretary, "are notorious for their tendency towards sensationalism." She was a woman of 40-odd years, plain but intelligent, who had served her employer with unwavering loyalty for the past decade. "The jewels were purchased quite legally from a reputable dealer in Geneva." "Of course they were," murmured Dr. Edmund Carey, the family physician, though his tone suggested a certain scepticism. He was a thin, nervous man whose practice among the wealthy had made him privy to more secrets than he cared to remember, though one might wonder why such valuable pieces are being displayed so openly, particularly given the recent unpleasantness. Lady Ravenscroft's composure flickered for just a moment. The unpleasantness to which Dr. Carey referred was a series of threatening letters she'd received over the past month, each more ominous than the last. The most recent had arrived only that morning, its message brief and chilling. "The blood of the Red Duchess stains those jewels. Tonight they return to their rightful place." "I refuse to be intimidated by anonymous cowards," she declared, though her hand trembled slightly as she closed the case. "The jewels will be displayed as planned for tomorrow evening's charity gala. Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Wessex has graciously agreed to view them, and I will not disappoint her." Young Edward Ravenscroft, Lady Diana's stepson and heir to the estate, looked up from his brandy with the slightly unfocused gaze of someone who had been drinking steadily throughout the evening. "Bit risky, don't you think, Diana? All those people tramping through the house, and with the servants' quarters being renovated, we're rather short-staffed. The jewels will be perfectly safe, his stepmother replied firmly. They're being kept in the strong room tonight, and tomorrow they'll be under constant guard. Besides, what could possibly happen at a charity gala in the presence of royalty? It was then that the lights went out. The power failure was sudden and complete, plunging the room into absolute darkness. For a moment there was only the sound of startled exclamations and the rustle of fabric, as the guests moved uncertainly in their chairs. Everyone remained calm, came Colonel Ashworth's authoritative voice. I have matches. But before he could strike a light, there came a sound that froze the blood of everyone present. A woman's scream, sharp and terrible, cut short with shocking abruptness. Diana! Dr. Carey's voice cracked with alarm. The scratch of a match, then the wavering flame of a candle as Colonel Ashworth managed to locate one from the mantelpiece. The flickering light revealed a scene of chaos, overturned chairs, scattered papers, and in the centre of it all, Lady Diana Ravenscroft lying motionless beside the overturned table where the jewel case had been displayed. Dr. Carey rushed to her side, his hands moving with professional efficiency as he checked for signs of life. His face when he looked up was grim. She's been struck on the head. The wound is severe. The jewels! Miss Hartley's voice was shrill with panic. The velvet case lay open beside Lady Diana's still form, its contents scattered across the Persian carpet. But even in the uncertain candlelight, it was clear that the most valuable piece, the magnificent ruby necklace, was missing. Good God, whispered Sir Marcus. Murder and theft. We must telephone the police immediately. The telephone lines are down, Edward said, his voice hollow with shock. The storm knocked them out an hour ago, and with the bridge washed out by the flooding, were completely cut off. It was then that Miss Hartley, who had been kneeling beside her employer, looked up with an expression of dawning horror. She's not dead, she whispered. She's breathing, but barely. Dr. Carey nodded grimly. She's unconscious, possibly dying. We need to get her to a hospital, but in this weather... He shook his head helplessly. As if summoned by the very desperation of their situation, there came a sound from the entrance hall, the opening of the front door, and the measured tread of footsteps across the marble floor. The butler Jameson appeared in the doorway, his usually impassive face betraying surprise. Forgive the intrusion, he announced, but there is a gentleman here who claims to have lost his way in the storm. He says his name is Poirot, Hercule Poirot. The small egg-shaped head that appeared behind the butler's shoulder was immediately recognizable to anyone who read the newspapers. Hercule Poirot, the famous Belgian detective, surveyed the scene before him with those sharp green eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His perfectly waxed moustaches quivered slightly as he took in the overturned furniture, the scattered jewels, and the unconscious form of Lady Ravenscroft. Mesdames et messieurs, he said in his precise accented English, it appears that Hercule Poirot has arrived at a most opportune moment. Or perhaps, he added, his gaze moving methodically from face to face, it is not entirely a coincidence, non? He stepped into the room with the careful precision of a cat, his patent leather shoes making no sound on the carpet. I was, you understand, travelling to London when the storm forced me to seek shelter. But now I see that fate has brought me here for a different purpose entirely. Colonel Ashworth found his voice first. Mr. Poirot, thank God you're here. There's been an attack. Lady Ravenscroft has been struck down, and the jewels of the Red Duchess have been stolen. Ah, Poirot murmured, producing a small notebook from his waistcoat pocket. The famous jewels, yes. I've read of them in the newspapers. Most interesting. He knelt beside the unconscious woman, studying her injuries with the detached interest of a professional. Dr. Carey, I presume? Your assessment, if you please. Severe head trauma, the physician replied. She needs immediate medical attention, but we're completely cut off. The telephone lines are down, and the roads are impassable. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Then we must make do with what we have. But first I must ask, when did this occur? Just moments ago, Miss Hartley said, wringing her hands. We were all here in the drawing room when the lights went out. There was a scream, and when Colonel Ashworth lit a candle, we found her like this. All of you were present? No one left the room? We were all here, Edward confirmed. The 6 of us, plus Diana. We'd been discussing the jewels and tomorrow's gala. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. 6 of you plus Lady Ravenscroft. That makes 7. Yet I count only 5 persons present now, in addition to the victim. His gaze moved deliberately around the room. Where, I wonder, are the missing 2? The silence that followed this observation was profound. Each of the remaining guests looked around the room as though seeing it for the first time, the horrible realization dawning that 2 of their number had indeed vanished into the night, along with the priceless ruby necklace. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his moustaches twitching with what might have been satisfaction. Already the little grey cells, they begin to perceive the pattern. We have here not merely a theft, but something far more complex. A crime of passion, perhaps, or of long-planned revenge. But first we must ensure that Madame Ravenscroft receives the care she needs. He turned to Dr. Carey. Can she be moved to a more comfortable location? Yes, but carefully. We should get her to her bedroom. As the men carefully lifted the unconscious woman, Poirot remained behind, his keen eyes studying the scene with microscopic attention. He noted the position of the overturned furniture, the scatter pattern of the remaining jewels, and most particularly, a small smear of what appeared to be red wax on the edge of the table. Curious, he murmured to himself. Most curious indeed. When the others had left to tend to Lady Ravenscroft, Poirot began his methodical examination of the room. Every detail was catalogued, every anomaly noted. The case that had held the jewels showed no signs of having been forced. Whoever had taken the necklace had simply lifted it out during the confusion of the power failure. But it was not the theft itself that intrigued Poirot most. It was the timing, the precision of it all. Someone had known exactly when to strike, had been prepared for the moment when darkness would provide the perfect cover. This was not the work of an opportunistic thief, but of someone who had planned every detail with meticulous care. As he completed his examination, Poirot became aware of a presence behind him. He turned to find Miss Hartley watching him with an expression that mingled hope and desperation. "Mr. Poirot," she said quietly, "you will find who did this, won't you? Lady Diana. She's been like a sister to me. If she dies—" "Mademoiselle," Poirot replied gently, "Hercule Poirot does not make promises lightly. But I will tell you this. Whoever has committed this crime has made one fatal error. They have assumed that darkness conceals all, that confusion erases all traces. But the little grey cells, they see what the eyes cannot. Before this night is over, the truth will be revealed." As if to punctuate his words, a flash of lightning illuminated the windows, followed by a crash of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of Ravenscroft Manor. The storm was far from over, and neither, Poirot suspected, was the night's drama. For somewhere in this house of secrets and lies, a would-be murderer walked free, believing themselves safe in the shadows. But Hercule Poirot had arrived, and with him came the inexorable light of justice that no darkness could extinguish. The game, as they say, was afoot. The great house had settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the storm's relentless assault upon the windows. Lady Diana lay unconscious in her bedroom, tended by Dr. Carey, while the remaining guests gathered in the morning room under Poirot's watchful eye. The Belgian detective had positioned himself with characteristic precision before the fireplace, his green eyes moving methodically from face to face. "We shall proceed with order," he announced, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his waistcoat. "First, we must establish exactly who was present when the lights failed, and who is now absent." Colonel Ashworth cleared his throat. "There were 7 of us in the drawing-room, including Diana. Myself, Edward, Sir Marcus, Miss Hartley, Dr. Carey, and 2 others who seem to have disappeared. Their names, if you please. Miss Celia Harcourt, Diana's cousin, and Mr. Lionel Grant, her financial advisor." The colonel's weathered face darkened. Dash it all, I should have noticed they were missing immediately. Poirot inclined his head. In moments of crisis, the mind focuses on the immediate danger. It is natural, but tell me, Dr. Carey, your examination of Lady Ravenscroft, what can you determine about the weapon used? The thin physician wiped his hands nervously. Something heavy and blunt. A paperweight, perhaps, or a candlestick. The blow was delivered with considerable force, intended to kill or at least render her unconscious for a considerable time. And her condition? Grave. Without proper hospital facilities? Dr. Carey shook his head. We can only wait and hope. Then time is precious, Poirot murmured. Jameson, you will search the house for Miss Harcourt and Monsieur Grant. Begin with their rooms. Note what they have taken, what they have left behind. As the butler departed, Poirot turned to the assembled group. Now, mes amis, we must speak of motives. Why would someone wish to harm Lady Ravenscroft? What secrets lurk beneath the surface of this elegant gathering? Miss Hartley's hands trembled in her lap. I cannot believe anyone here would... But someone did, Poirot interrupted gently. The doors were locked, the storm raging. No outsider could have entered. The attacker was among your intimate circle. Sir Marcus Thornbury polished his spectacles with deliberate care. If we must speak plainly, Diana was in considerable financial difficulty. The jewels were not merely for display, they were to be sold. I had arranged a discreet sale to a foreign collector. Edward Ravenscroft started, nearly dropping his glass. Sold? But Diana said... Your stepmother maintained appearances, Sir Marcus continued. The sale was to take place after tomorrow's gala. The Duchess's presence would authenticate the pieces and justify the asking price. Colonel Ashworth's face flushed. She owed me money, substantial sums. I had been pressing her for repayment. As had others, no doubt, Poirot observed. Dr. Carey, you knew of these financial troubles? I advised against the stress of the exhibition, the doctor replied stiffly. Diana's health had been suffering under the strain. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. So we have financial desperation, pressing debts, and a fortune in jewels about to change hands. Most illuminating. At that moment, Jameson returned, his usual composure shaken. Sir, Miss Harcourt's room appears hastily abandoned. Clothes scattered, jewellery box empty. Mr. Grant's room is the same. But, sir, he hesitated. Yes. The garden door in the east wing stands open. There are footprints in the mud leading toward the old oak grove. In this storm? Edward exclaimed. Celia would never venture out in such weather. She's terrified of thunder. Poirot moved to the window, studying the rain-lashed grounds. Perhaps she had compelling reason to brave her fears. He turned back to the group, his expression grave. Or perhaps someone wished us to believe she had fled. From his waistcoat pocket, he produced a small evidence envelope. I found this in the drawing room, caught beneath the overturned table. He opened it to reveal a small pearl button, its thread torn. Expensive, the kind found on a lady's evening glove? Miss Hartley gasped. That's from Celia's gloves? I remember them, white kid with pearl buttons. Indeed. Yet if Mademoiselle Harcourt fled through the garden door, how came this button to be torn off in the drawing room? Poirot's moustaches twitched. The little grey cells, they suggest that all is not as it appears. We have two missing persons, one unconscious victim, and a trail of evidence that leads in circles. He moved toward the door. Come. We shall examine these abandoned rooms. Often what people leave behind tells us more than what they take. The corridor leading to the guest wing stretched before them like a dimly lit tunnel, its oak panelling gleaming dully in the wavering candlelight. The portraits of long-dead Ravenscrofts gazed down from their gilded frames with expressions that seemed to mirror the gravity of the present situation. Poirot walked with his characteristic precise steps, each footfall deliberate and measured, while the others followed in a subdued procession that spoke volumes about their collective unease. The first examination. We shall begin with Mademoiselle Harcourt's quarters, Poirot announced, pausing before a door painted in the soft blue that had been fashionable a decade earlier. I ask that you observe carefully but touch nothing. The little grey cells, they require undisturbed evidence to function properly. The room beyond presented a scene of apparent chaos that immediately caught Poirot's attention. Drawers hung open with silk stockings and delicate undergarments spilling onto the Aubusson carpet. The wardrobe doors stood ajar, revealing empty hangers that swayed gently in the draught from an ill-fitting window. Yet something about the disorder struck the Belgian detective as theatrical, too perfectly arranged to represent genuine panic. Tell me about Mademoiselle Harcourt's character, he commanded, his green eyes moving methodically across the scattered belongings. Miss Hartley stepped forward hesitantly. Celia is Diana's cousin, raised almost as a sister after her parents died in India. She's been living here since her own inheritance was lost in some unfortunate railway investments last year. She's highly strung, nervous about financial matters. Poirot nodded, kneeling beside the bed where a leather travelling case lay half-packed. The garments within had been thrust in carelessly, evening gowns crumpled atop folded chemises, a beaded purse tossed in without regard for its delicate construction. For a woman known for her vanity about clothes, such treatment seemed entirely out of character. His attention was drawn to the dressing table, where among the usual feminine accoutrements, crystal perfume bottles, silver-backed brushes, pots of rouge and powder, stood a photograph in an ornate silver frame. The image showed a young woman unmistakably identifiable as Celia Harcourt, but the man whose arm encircled her waist was not the prosperous manufacturer she was reportedly engaged to marry. This gentleman, Poirot inquired, lifting the photograph with careful fingers. He is not Monsieur Larkin, the intended bridegroom. Miss Hartley's face coloured slightly. No, that's André Valdés, a Spanish pianist. Celia met him in Biarritz 2 summers ago. It was an unfortunate attachment. Diana disapproved strongly. Yet she keeps his photograph prominently displayed, Poirot observed. Curious behaviour for a lady whose heart has transferred itself to another. He replaced the frame exactly where it had been and moved to examine the wardrobe more closely. On the floor, half hidden beneath a fallen silk scarf, lay a slender cardboard box bearing the embossed name of a renowned Parisian jeweller. Poirot opened it to reveal cotton wool, indented in the unmistakable shape of a necklace, but the box was empty. Most interesting, he murmured. Mademoiselle Harcourt possessed jewellery of her own, it would seem. Valuable enough to warrant such elegant packaging. The second room. Lionel Grant's quarters, 2 doors further along the corridor, presented an entirely different aspect. Where Celia's room suggested panicked flight, Grant's spoke of methodical preparation or careful staging. A single leather suitcase stood by the wardrobe, packed with mathematical precision. Shirts were folded with military exactness, shoes wrapped in tissue paper, toiletries arranged in a leather case, with every item in its designated place. Either he departed hours ago, Edward muttered, or this packing was done by someone with considerably more composure than a fleeing criminal. Poirot moved to the writing desk where papers lay scattered in apparent haste. Among them he discovered a sheet of hotel stationery bearing a partially completed letter in Grant's precise handwriting. But it was what lay in the fireplace that truly captured his attention. The charred remains of what had once been several sheets of correspondence. Using a pair of tweezers from his waistcoat pocket, he carefully extracted a fragment that had escaped complete destruction. The paper was expensive, cream-coloured, and bore part of a message in a feminine hand. Meet me in the library at midnight. Do not fail me. The matter concerns the Red Duchess and cannot wait. The library, Colonel Ashworth frowned, but that's in the West Wing. Why would they arrange to meet there when the jewels were displayed in the East drawing room? An excellent observation, Poirot replied, unless the meeting concerned not the theft of the jewels, but something else entirely. He moved to the bedside table and after a moment's search, produced a dark blue passport. Most curious. Monsieur Grant, if he planned to flee the country, has left behind rather an essential item. Physical evidence. As they prepared to leave Grant's room, Poirot paused in the doorway, his attention caught by something on the corridor carpet. Kneeling, he examined a faint, dark smear near the skirting board. He touched it delicately with one finger, then brought it to his nose. "River mud," he announced, "distinctive in its composition and odor. And here," he pointed to a tiny glistening object caught in the carpets pile. "A sequin, red, to match the dress Mademoiselle Harcourt wore this evening." The implications hung heavy in the air. Someone had tracked mud from the grounds into the house, yet the evidence suggested movement in both directions, inside to outside and outside to inside. Preliminary conclusions. "Mes amis," Poirot said, rising and brushing an invisible speck of dust from his waistcoat, "we are presented with a most intriguing puzzle. We have evidence of 2 hasty departures, yet both leave behind essential items. We have a secret meeting arranged for the library, yet the crime occurred in the drawing room. We have footprints leading to the garden, yet mud tracked back into the house." He paused, his mustaches twitching slightly, with what might have been satisfaction. "Someone wishes us to believe a particular story, that Monsieur Grant and Mademoiselle Harcourt have fled together after committing theft and attempted murder. But the little grey cells, they whisper that this convenient solution conceals a far more complex truth." The storm outside seemed to echo his words with a renewed fury, rattling the windows and sending shadows dancing across the walls. In the distance, a door slammed, whether from the wind or human agency, none could say. But Hercule Poirot's expression suggested that each new piece of evidence, far from simplifying the mystery, was revealing layers of deception that would require all his considerable skills to unravel. The night was far from over, and neither, it seemed, was the unfolding drama at Ravenscroft Manor. The morning room had taken on the oppressive atmosphere of a courtroom, with Poirot positioned before the fireplace, like a prosecuting counsel preparing to dissect each witness's testimony. The remaining suspects sat in uncomfortable silence, their earlier composure eroded by the mounting evidence of deception within their midst. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, but within these walls a different kind of tempest was brewing. "We shall proceed with method," Poirot announced, his green eyes moving systematically from face to face. "Each of you will recount precisely what occurred from the moment dinner ended until Lady Ravenscroft was discovered unconscious. I require not impressions, but facts, what you saw, what you heard, where you stood, where you moved." Edward Ravenscroft shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier bravado diminished by the gravity of their situation. After dinner ended at 8:30, Diana went upstairs to change her jewellery. She never liked wearing the Red Duchess pieces for extended periods, claimed they brought her nightmares. The Colonel Grant and I retired to the smoking room for brandy and cigars. "At what precise time did you enter the drawing room?" Poirot inquired, his notebook poised. "Perhaps 10 minutes before 9. Jameson summoned us when Diana was ready for the presentation. We all gathered, the 7 of us as you know, and Diana made her little speech about the jewel's history. Then the lights failed." Poirot's moustaches twitched slightly. "During the interval of darkness, describe your exact movements and sensations." "I remained where I was standing near the window. Someone brushed past me rather roughly. I assumed it was someone trying to reach the door. Then came that terrible scream, cut short as though—" Edward's voice faltered. Colonel Ashworth took up the narrative with military precision. "I moved immediately toward the mantelpiece, where I knew matches were kept. Knocked over a small porcelain figure in the process. You'll find the pieces on the hearth. The entire episode couldn't have lasted more than 30 seconds. Sir Marcus Thornbury polished his spectacles with deliberate care. I had been examining the necklace closely when the lights failed. My instinct was to protect the pieces, But in complete darkness, movement seemed inadvisable. Someone did brush past me quite violently. It might have been Miss Harcourt, as she was standing nearest to me. Dr. Carey's account corroborated the others, though his voice trembled with emotion. When I heard the scream, I dropped to one knee and felt forward until I encountered Lady Diana's shoulder. The blow had been struck with considerable force. The attacker intended either death or prolonged unconsciousness. Miss Hartley's testimony added little beyond confirming that she had remained stationary, clutching Sir Marcus's chair for support throughout the ordeal. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. So according to each account, only Colonel Ashworth moved deliberately during the darkness, and perhaps some slight jostling occurred. Yet in those brief moments, a savage blow was delivered and a priceless necklace removed. Either your memories deceive you, or one among you speaks falsely. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from the dying fire. It was then that Jameson, who had been hovering discreetly near the doorway, cleared his throat hesitantly. "Forgive the interruption, sir, but there is something else. When I went to secure the east garden door after discovering it ajar, I found that the key was missing from the interior lock. It's never removed. I locked that door myself at 7 o'clock when the wind began rising." Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "Ah, most significant indeed. You're certain it was there earlier?" "Absolutely, sir. I check all the ground floor locks personally each evening." "Then someone has deliberately created a means of exit, or entrance," Poirot mused. "In a house supposedly sealed by the storm, we have a carefully prepared escape route. This was not the work of opportunistic thieves, mes amis, but of someone who planned every detail with meticulous care." He rose abruptly, his decision made. "We shall now examine the library where, according to the burned correspondence, a midnight meeting was arranged. The little grey cells whisper that this meeting place may hold secrets more valuable than any stolen necklace." The library occupied the ground floor of the West Tower, its circular walls lined with centuries of accumulated knowledge. As they entered, Poirot's torch beam revealed signs of recent occupation: 2 chairs drawn close to the dying embers, a brandy decanter with one empty glass and another half full, the lingering scent of expensive tobacco in the air. "Someone took great care to remove evidence," Poirot observed, examining the pristine epoxy ashtray despite the tobacco scent. "But perfection itself can be revealing. A smoker who leaves no ash suggests consciousness of being observed." His attention was caught by something glinting near the fireplace, a silver cigarette case bearing the initials LG. Miss Hartley identified it immediately as belonging to Lionel Grant, a gift from his deceased wife that he never left behind. "Yet he abandons it here while his passport remains in his bedroom," Poirot murmured. "Curious behaviour for a man planning escape." Opening the case revealed a single unsmoked Turkish cigarette, and beneath it something far more intriguing: a small brass key, unmistakably matching the style of the Manor's interior locks. "Voilà," Poirot whispered, his moustaches quivering with satisfaction. The missing garden door key. But why would Monsieur Grant possess it, and why hide it in his cigarette case? The little grey cells suggest we have been viewing this mystery from entirely the wrong perspective. The storm outside seemed to echo his words with renewed fury, as though nature herself recognized that the truth was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows of deception that had shrouded Ravenscroft Manor. The small brass key lay in Poirot's palm like an accusation, its polished surface reflecting the library's flickering candlelight. The Belgian detective studied it with the same intensity he might devote to a rare manuscript, turning it slowly between his fingers while his green eyes moved systematically across the faces of his increasingly uncomfortable audience. "Observe, mes amis," he began, his precise accent cutting through the storm's distant rumble, "that this key tells us a story, not of guilt, but of careful preparation. Someone wished us to discover it here, wrapped in Monsieur Grant's cigarette case, like a gift for the unwary investigator. Edward Ravenscroft shifted restlessly against the bookshelf. But surely the evidence speaks for itself. Grant had the means to unlock the garden door, he's disappeared along with Celia, and the jewels are missing. What more proof do we need? Proof? Poirot's moustaches quivered with what might have been amusement. You speak of proof, when we've only arranged coincidences. Tell me, would a man planning theft and murder leave behind his passport? Would he hide the very key that ensures his escape in a place where it might easily be discovered? Non, mon ami. The little grey cells, they whisper that we are meant to reach these conclusions too easily. He moved to the library desk where a leather-bound ledger lay open, its pages revealing columns of figures in Grant's meticulous handwriting. Here we find something more illuminating. The household accounts, kept with mathematical precision until this final entry. His torchbeam illuminated the last line, where the usually steady script showed unmistakable signs of agitation. A substantial transfer to someone identified only as A.V.'s, made just hours before the attack on Lady Ravenscroft. Miss Hartley gasped. Andre Valdez, Celia's Spanish pianist. But why would Diana send him money? An excellent question, Poirot murmured, and one that suggests our missing Mademoiselle Harcourt may have secrets of her own. He examined the brandy glasses more closely, noting the faint coral lipstick stain on one rim. Lady Ravenscroft met someone here before the presentation, someone she trusted enough to share a private drink. The conversation, judging by the abandoned half-glass, was interrupted or ended abruptly. Colonel Ashworth cleared his throat uncomfortably. That lipstick shade, it was Diana's, I remember it distinctly. But who was she meeting? Grant? Before Poirot could respond, a commotion erupted from the entrance hall, the sound of the front door opening against the wind, urgent voices, and Jameson's startled exclamation. The group rushed toward the disturbance to discover an extraordinary scene unfolding in the marble vestibule. Two bedraggled figures stood dripping onto the polished floor, their evening clothes ruined by mud and rain. Celia Harcourt's elaborate coiffure had collapsed into sodden tangles, while Lionel Grant's usually immaculate appearance suggested he had been dragged through several hedgerows. Between them, supported by their combined efforts, was a third person, a young man in servant's livery, unconscious and bleeding from a wound on his temple. "Thank heaven you're safe," Dr. Carey exclaimed, rushing forward to examine the injured man. "We feared the worst when you both disappeared." Grant, still catching his breath, met Poirot's measuring gaze directly. "We received separate messages, supposedly from Diana, asking us to meet her at the old gamekeeper's cottage. The notes claimed she had discovered who was threatening her and needed witnesses she could trust. When we arrived, we found this young man, Thomas, one of the temporary staff hired for tomorrow's gala, locked inside and barely conscious." "The door was barred from outside," Celia added, her voice steadier despite her bedraggled state. "Someone wanted him hidden. We've been trying to revive him and determine his injuries. The storm made it impossible to return sooner." Poirot approached the unconscious servant with characteristic precision. "Dr. Carey, your assessment." "Chloral hydrate poisoning, I believe, administered several hours ago. The head wound is superficial, more likely from falling than deliberate violence. He should regain consciousness within the hour." "Most illuminating," Poirot murmured. "We have, it seems, not one victim, but potentially three. Lady Ravenscroft, this young man, and possibly the truth itself." His sharp eyes studied Celia's appearance with uncomfortable intensity. "Mademoiselle, you claim to have spent hours in a storm-lashed cottage, yet your pearl necklace remains perfectly clasped, while a button from your gloves, more securely fastened, was found at the scene of the attack. Most curious." Celia's hand flew instinctively to her throat. The cottage had a roof. I was sheltered from the worst of it." "Indeed. And your shoes, muddy on the soles but dry on the insteps, suggest extended walking followed by extended sitting. In a dry place, perhaps?" Poirot's tone remained gentle, but his meaning was unmistakable. The colour drained from Celia's face. "What are you implying, Mr. Poirot?" I imply nothing. I observe everything. He turned to Grant. Monsieur, these messages that summoned you both, do you still possess them? Grant patted his sodden pockets, then shook his head. The rain destroyed them. They were written on ordinary paper in what appeared to be Diana's handwriting. Convenient, Poirot observed, as is the discovery of this injured servant, who may or may not corroborate your story when he awakens. Tell me, had either of you encountered this Thomas before tonight? The guilty glance that passed between Celia and Grant did not escape Poirot's notice, though neither answered immediately. The little grey cells, Poirot continued, suggest we are witnessing an elaborate performance. Someone has gone to considerable trouble to create the impression of external threats while orchestrating events from within. The question remains, who benefits from this deception, and what is the true object of their desire? He moved toward the stairs with decision. We shall now examine Lady Ravenscroft's condition more closely. Often what the unconscious retain tells us more than what the conscious choose to reveal. As they ascended to the first floor, Poirot's mind was already racing ahead, connecting the disparate threads of evidence into a pattern that was both more complex and more sinister than any of his companions suspected. The jewels of the Red Duchess might be missing, but Hercule Poirot was beginning to suspect they were the least valuable treasure at stake in this deadly game of deception and revenge. The storm outside seemed to echo his thoughts, its fury unabated as the night wore on toward whatever revelations dawn might bring to the troubled halls of Ravenscroft Manor. Lady Diana Ravenscroft's bedroom had been transformed into an impromptu infirmary, its usual elegance subdued by the gravity of the situation. Heavy velvet curtains blocked the storm's fury, while lamplight cast gentle pools of illumination around the four-poster bed where she lay motionless. Dr. Carey maintained his vigil beside her, monitoring each shallow breath with professional concern that barely masked his personal anxiety. Poirot approached with characteristic reverence, his green eyes cataloguing every detail of the sick room's arrangement. The scent of lavender water mingled with medicinal camphor, while fresh lilies on the nightstand provided a touch of beauty amid the clinical necessities. Her condition remains unchanged? Poirot inquired softly. Stable but critical, Dr. Carey replied. The blow was calculated, forceful enough to incapacitate without immediate death. Either the attacker possessed medical knowledge or exercised remarkable restraint. Poirot moved closer, studying Diana's face with the intensity of a scholar examining an ancient manuscript. Even unconscious, she possessed a formidable presence, her features marked by decades of social triumph and private struggle. His attention was drawn to her right hand, which lay atop the coverlet, with fingers slightly curled inward. Most interesting, he murmured, examining the hand with minute attention. These scratches on the palm suggest she fought back, however briefly, and here he pointed to faint traces beneath her fingernails. Red wax, the same substance we discovered at the crime scene. Miss Hartley stepped forward anxiously. Diana removed her evening gloves before the presentation, saying the Red Duchess pieces should be admired without competition. Yet the gloves have vanished entirely, Poirot observed. One button from Mademoiselle Harcourt's gloves at the scene, but Lady Ravenscroft's own gloves completely absent. This is most significant. He moved to examine her other hand, noting powder residue on her fingertips. With characteristic precision, he wiped the traces with his handkerchief, studying the faint smear that came away. Powder from electrical connections, he announced, the same residue one finds on fuse box switches. Lady Ravenscroft has handled recently whatever controls the electricity in this house. Dr. Carey stared in amazement. You mean Diana put out the lights herself? I mean only that she has handled the mechanism, Poirot replied carefully. Whether by design or accident remains to be determined. Moving to Diana's dressing table, Poirot discovered a small leather-bound diary, its clasp unlocked. The final entry, dated that morning, read in Diana's flowing script, The time has come to end this charade. Tonight, after the presentation, I shall reveal everything. Let them judge me as they will. I can no longer bear the weight of these accumulated lies. Avie has agreed to help, though the price is higher than I anticipated. She planned some revelation for tonight, Poirot murmured, something significant enough to cause her considerable distress. At that moment, Thomas appeared in the doorway, supported by Jameson. The young servant was conscious now, though pale and unsteady. "You feel well enough to speak?" Poirot asked gently. "We require only the truth, nothing more." Thomas nodded shakily. "I remember now, sir. Before I was drugged, I saw someone near the strong room, adjusting the fuse box. They didn't see me watching from the pantry stairs." "The fuse box," Poirot repeated with satisfaction, "which controls the drawing-room lights. So the power failure was not natural but deliberately arranged." Suddenly a soft moan escaped Diana's lips. Dr. Carey leaned forward urgently as her eyelids fluttered. The room fell silent except for the storm's distant rumble and her laboured breathing. For several heartbeats, consciousness seemed to struggle against trauma. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused with pain, then gradually cleared as she focused on the faces surrounding her bed. Her gaze moved from person to person with terrifying intensity until it rested on one individual. "You," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "Why did you—" "The necklace. Fake." The effort exhausted her, and she slipped back into unconsciousness, but the single word hung in the air like a thunderclap, transforming the entire mystery. "Fake?" Sir Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "Surely she cannot mean the Red Duchess jewels themselves." Poirot straightened, his moustaches twitching with what might have been satisfaction. "Perhaps she refers not to the jewels, but to the entire situation surrounding them. We have here powder on her hands, suggesting she controlled the lights, evidence of a struggle, missing gloves, and now her own testimony that something was false." He moved to the centre of the room, drawing himself up to his full height. "The little grey cells whisper that we have witnessed not a crime of passion, mes amis, but a carefully orchestrated performance. The power failure was arranged, the theft was staged, and someone went to extraordinary lengths to create an elaborate deception." The clock chimed midnight, its silvery notes marking not merely time's passage, but the transition to a new phase of investigation. Hercule Poirot's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man who had begun to perceive the true pattern hidden beneath layers of misdirection. "We shall now examine the strong room," he announced, "where the real truth awaits discovery." The strong room lay in the manor's oldest section, its medieval stone walls housing a fortress of family secrets behind a modern steel door. The lock showed no signs of forced entry, yet the door stood ajar, like a mouth preparing to speak forbidden truths. Poirot approached with the reverence of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation, his torch beam cutting through the musty darkness to illuminate rows of leather document cases and velvet-lined jewelry boxes. "Observe, mes amis," he instructed, his voice echoing softly against the stone, "that this sanctuary was violated not by violence, but by someone possessing legitimate access, or the skill to obtain it through deception." His examination of the floor revealed feminine footprints in the undisturbed dust, small and narrow, made by practical walking shoes rather than evening slippers. These prints led directly to the central shelf, where the Red Duchess collection had been stored, then to a maintenance panel concealing the room's ventilation system. These impressions were made hours ago, Poirot determined, long before our evening's drama commenced. Someone entered here this afternoon with specific purpose and considerable time to execute their plan. Jameson's composure cracked slightly. Lady Diana visited at 4 o'clock to inspect the jewels personally. She remained alone for 20 minutes while I prepared tea service. 20 minutes, Poirot mused. Sufficient time for careful work. He moved to examine the ventilation grill, noting scratches around its edges. "Jameson, if you would assist me with that step-ladder." Climbing carefully, Poirot reached into the shaft and withdrew a small leather pouch. Inside, wrapped in velvet cloth, lay not complete jewellery, but individual stones, rubies and diamonds of exceptional quality, each carefully removed from its original setting. Sir Marcus gasped, adjusting his spectacles for closer examination. Those are the genuine stones from the Red Duchess collection. I recognize the precise cuts, the minute inclusions. But if these are here, then what was displayed in the drawing room? Poirot completed the thought as he descended. Paste replicas of extraordinary quality, mes amis. The real stones were extracted hours ago, right here in this chamber. From his waistcoat, he produced a small evidence envelope containing red wax fragments. Jeweller's wax, used for creating moulds. Someone has been producing replicas for some time, requiring both the original stones for copying and considerable expertise. Edward's face had gone pale. You mean Diana planned the entire theft? But why attack herself? She did not, Poirot replied gravely. Lady Ravenscroft intended to display convincing replicas while secreting the genuine stones for separate sale, a desperate solution to her financial difficulties. The insurance value of £300,000 versus the market value of £200,000 would have resolved her debts while preserving her reputation. He moved to examine the room's electrical panel, revealing a crumpled receipt from a London theatrical supplier. Flash powder and smoke pellets to enhance the drama of the power failure. But someone discovered her plan and decided to turn it to their own advantage. Miss Hartley's voice trembled. You mean someone else knew about the replicas? Precisely. Someone who realized that a staged theft provided the perfect cover for real violence. They struck during the confusion, not to steal worthless paste jewellery, but to silence Lady Ravenscroft before she could reveal what her diary called accumulated lies. Poirot's green eyes moved systematically across the assembled faces. The little grey cells whisper that we have witnessed not one crime, but two. The planned insurance fraud and its violent hijacking by someone with far more to lose than money. Colonel Ashworth cleared his throat uncomfortably. But surely the stolen necklace, even if paste, would be discovered as fake eventually. Indeed, Poirot agreed, which suggests our true criminal cared nothing for the success of the theft itself. They required only the chaos and confusion to mask their real objective, preventing Lady Ravenscroft from speaking her planned revelation. He secured the pouch of genuine stones carefully in his jacket. We return now to examine what secrets were worth killing to protect, for I begin to perceive that the Red Duchess jewels, magnificent though they are, were merely the stage dressing for a far more deadly drama. The storm outside seemed to echo his words, its fury unabated as they prepared to leave the violated sanctuary. But Hercule Poirot's expression suggested that the tempest within Ravenscroft Manor was approaching its most dangerous phase, the moment when accumulated lies would finally collide with inexorable truth. The end game approaches, he murmured, more to himself than the others, and I suspect our killer has not yet finished with their deadly performance. The grey dawn that crept through Ravenscroft Manor's windows brought no relief from the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the house like a shroud. The storm's fury had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind an unnatural stillness that seemed to amplify every whispered conversation and nervous footstep. Dr. Carey emerged from Diana's bedroom with the grim news that her condition remained unchanged, hovering between life and death, while the truth remained locked within her unconscious mind. Poirot had spent the pre-dawn hours in solitary contemplation, his green eyes studying the accumulated evidence with the intensity of a scholar deciphering an ancient manuscript. Now, as the household gathered once more in the drawing-room, he positioned himself before the fireplace with the bearing of a conductor, preparing to direct his final symphony. "We shall reconstruct," he announced, his precise accent cutting through the morning's silence. "Each of you will stand exactly where you stood when the lights failed. We must recreate not merely the physical arrangement, but the psychological landscape of those crucial moments." With methodical precision, he guided each person to their original position. Edward by the window, Colonel Ashworth near the mantelpiece, Sir Marcus beside the display table, Miss Hartley by the door, Dr. Carey slightly apart with his perpetual medical bag. The two who had mysteriously vanished, Celia and Grant, were positioned where they claimed to have stood before receiving their false summons. Now observe, Poirot continued, extinguishing the lamps one by one until only candlelight remained. Lady Ravenscroft stood here, displaying what she believed to be convincing replicas, while the genuine stones lay hidden in the strong room. She thought herself safe, her desperate plan proceeding smoothly. But someone in this room knew the truth about more than just paste jewellery. He moved to the centre of the room, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The little grey cells have revealed something most illuminating about our mysterious AV. The recipient of those substantial payments that drained Lady Ravenscroft's resources. Andre Valdez is not merely Mademoiselle Harcourt's former lover, mes amis. He is Lady Ravenscroft's son. The collective gasp that followed this revelation seemed to suck the air from the room. Celia's face went chalk white, while Edward stared at Poirot with an expression of dawning comprehension. Her illegitimate son, Poirot continued relentlessly, born before her marriage and given up for adoption. The payments were not blackmail in the conventional sense, but support for a young man who had discovered his true parentage and demanded recognition, or at least financial acknowledgement. Miss Hartley found her voice first. "That's impossible. Diana never spoke of it naturellement," Poirot interrupted gently. "But the evidence is clear. The photograph in Mademoiselle Harcourt's room shows not a lover's embrace, but the careful distance of relatives meeting in secret. The financial records show regular payments, beginning precisely when Monsieur Valdez would have reached his majority and gained access to adoption records." Sir Marcus adjusted his spectacles nervously. "Even if this is true, what bearing does it have on last night's attack?" "Everything," Poirot replied. For Lady Ravenscroft had decided to end the secrecy. Her diary spoke of revealing accumulated lies. She planned to acknowledge Andre publicly, to legitimize him as her heir alongside Edward. This revelation would have destroyed someone's carefully laid plans. He moved to examine the overturned table where the jewel case had been displayed. The attack was not random violence during a theft, but calculated murder disguised as robbery. Someone struck with medical precision, hard enough to incapacitate, positioned to suggest external violence. The paste necklace was taken merely to complete the illusion. Dr. Carey shifted uncomfortably. "You speak of medical precision. Are you suggesting—" "I suggest nothing yet," Poirot replied smoothly, "but I observe everything. The red wax beneath Lady Ravenscroft's fingernails tells us she scratched not flesh, but an object, something her attacker wore or carried. The missing gloves were taken not as trophies, but because they bore evidence of the struggles, and they see here produced the small evidence bag containing the pearl button. This was planted to implicate Mademoiselle Harcourt, just as the muddy footprints were created to suggest flight. But the killer made one crucial error. They assumed darkness would conceal all traces of their presence. The tension in the room had become almost unbearable. Each person seemed to shrink under Poirot's penetrating gaze, as though he could read their deepest secrets with those sharp green eyes. "Miss Hartley," Poirot said suddenly, "you will now announce to the household that Lady Ravenscroft has regained consciousness and remembers her attacker perfectly." Miss Hartley stared at him in confusion. "But she hasn't," Dr. Carey said. "Precisely," Poirot replied with satisfaction. "Our killer does not know that. Let us observe whose nerves betray them when faced with the prospect of immediate exposure." As Miss Hartley reluctantly departed to spread the false news, Poirot's moustaches twitched with what might have been anticipation. The psychological trap was set, and soon the accumulated pressure of guilt and fear would crack even the most carefully maintained facade. "The endgame approaches," he murmured, his eyes never leaving the assembled suspects, "and I suspect our murderer is about to make their final fatal mistake." The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to illuminate not clarity, but deeper shadows, shadows that would soon reveal the truth hidden within Ravenscroft Manor's walls. The false announcement rippled through Ravenscroft Manor like a stone cast into still water, each successive wave revealing hidden currents beneath the surface calm. Poirot had positioned himself strategically in the entrance hall, his sharp green eyes cataloguing every reaction with the precision of a scientist observing critical specimens under stress. Edward Ravenscroft's response was immediate and visceral. His brandy glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor as colour drained from his face. "She remembers," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm's dying whispers. "Everything." "So, Miss Hartley reports," Poirot replied smoothly, noting how the young man's gaze darted instinctively toward the servants' staircase, not the main stairs leading to his stepmother's room, but the route that would take him away from the house entirely. Dr. Carey's reaction proved equally illuminating. His habitual nervousness escalated into something approaching panic, his thin hands trembling as they moved instinctively to his medical bag. "I must examine her immediately," he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "Head trauma patients can suffer dangerous relapses. The excitement of remembering will be carefully monitored," Poirot interrupted gently, "by others for the moment." It was then that Miss Hartley appeared in the morning room doorway, her face bearing the strain of her deception. In her hand, she clutched an envelope addressed in hasty script. Poirot's keen eyes noted the recipient: Messrs. Blackwood and Sons, Lincoln's Inn Fields, specialists in criminal defence. "Preparing for eventualities, mademoiselle?" he inquired mildly. Her composure cracked slightly. "One must be prudent, with accusations flying about." "Yet I have made no accusations," Poirot observed. "Curious that you seek legal counsel before any charges have been contemplated." Before she could respond, Lionel Grant burst from the library, his usually meticulous appearance dishevelled, clutching a leather document case. "Mr. Poirot, you must see this. I've been reviewing Diana's private papers. There's a will dated 3 days ago." The silence that followed was profound, as Grant extracted the document with shaking hands. "She's left everything to Andre Valdez, the entire estate, the jewels, all of it. Edward receives only a modest annuity." Edward staggered as though physically struck. "That's impossible. Diana promised. She said my father's legacy would remain intact." "Your half-brother's legitimacy changes everything," Poirot observed quietly. "The little grey cells perceive at last the true motive, not greed for jewels, but desperate preservation of inheritance." Celia Harcourt, who had been silent in the corner, suddenly stepped forward. "Andre is not my lover," she declared, her voice breaking. "He's my half-brother. Diana made me swear to keep the secret, said it would destroy the family if the truth emerged. But yesterday, she told me she planned to acknowledge him publicly, to give him his rightful place." Sir Marcus Thornbury removed his spectacles with deliberate care. "I must confess my own deception. The paste necklace was created at my arrangement. Diana was desperate. She needed to sell the genuine stones while maintaining appearances. I agreed to help, for a percentage." "Yet someone discovered this plan," Poirot murmured, "and realized that Lady Ravenscroft's intended revelation would legitimize Andre's claim while destroying their own expectations." Dr. Carey's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand the pressure she was under. The financial strain, the family secrets, the constant fear of exposure. As her physician, I saw how it was destroying her health. Sometimes mercy requires difficult decisions." "Mercy?" Poirot's voice carried a note of steel. "You speak of mercy when describing attempted murder?" The doctor's face went ashen. "I never intended. The blow was meant only to incapacitate, to prevent her from making a terrible mistake. The family would have been destroyed. Andre's career ruined by scandal. I thought if she were unconscious for a few days, unable to speak at the gala, You would have had time to arrange a more permanent solution, Poirot completed grimly. The missing key in your cigarette case, the forged notes to remove potential witnesses, all part of a physician's methodical planning. The morning sun, breaking through the last storm clouds, illuminated faces marked by guilt, fear, and dawning comprehension. The web of deception had finally begun to unravel, each thread leading inexorably to the same conclusion. The time has come, Poirot announced, his voice carrying absolute authority, for the final gathering. In 1 hour, all will assemble in the drawing room where this tragedy began. There, Hercule Poirot will reveal not merely who struck the blow, but the complete architecture of lies that made this crime seem necessary to a desperate and deluded mind. The endgame had truly begun, and soon the accumulated weight of truth would crush the last vestiges of deception that had poisoned the halls of Ravenscroft Manor. The drawing room had been restored to its former elegance, though the very air seemed to vibrate with the tension of impending revelation. Poirot had arranged the chairs in a precise semicircle, each position to afford him an unobstructed view of every face. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast everything in sharp relief, as though truth itself demanded illumination after so many hours of shadow and deception. Lady Diana Ravenscroft, pale but conscious now, had insisted on being present despite Dr. Carey's protestations about her fragile condition. She reclined on the chaise longue, her bandaged head a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the previous evening's gathering. Around her sat the remaining players in this deadly drama, each bearing the weight of secrets that had contributed to the night's tragedy. The foundation of deception. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his green eyes moving with characteristic precision across each assembled face. We have witnessed not one crime, but a complex symphony of deceptions, each movement building upon the last until violence became inevitable. The little grey cells have at last penetrated to the heart of this labyrinth. He moved to the centre of the room, his small figure commanding absolute attention. We begin with what appeared to be the central mystery, the theft of the Red Duchess jewels. Yet, as I suspected from the beginning, these magnificent stones were merely the stage dressing for a far more deadly performance. Sir Marcus Thornbury shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The paste replicas were created at my arrangement, he admitted quietly. Lady Ravenscroft was desperate. She needed to sell the genuine stones while maintaining appearances for the royal gala. Precisely, Poirot acknowledged. But this deception, elaborate though it was, served only to mask the true crime. For someone in this room realized that Lady Ravenscroft's planned revelation would destroy not only her carefully constructed life, but their own future as well. The revelation of blood. Diana's voice, though weak, carried clearly across the room. I had decided to acknowledge my son Andre publicly. After 20 years of secrecy, I could no longer bear the weight of denying his existence. And with that acknowledgement, Poirot continued, came a new will leaving the entire estate to your firstborn child. A decision that would have disinherited not only Edward, but someone else who had far more intimate knowledge of your affairs, someone who had served you faithfully for 10 years while harbouring a secret that made your betrayal doubly bitter. His gaze fixed upon Miss Hartley, whose composed facade had begun to crack like fine porcelain under unbearable pressure. Mademoiselle Vivian Hartley, or should I say Mademoiselle Vivian Ravenscroft? The collective gasp that followed seemed to drain the oxygen from the room. Miss Hartley's hands trembled violently as she gripped the arms of her chair, her face cycling through shock, fear, and finally, a terrible resignation. Your mother, Poirot continued relentlessly, was lady's maid to the Red Duchess herself. She bore a child to the same Russian nobleman who fathered Diana, making you half-sisters through your father's blood. The jewels were as much your inheritance as hers, yet you lived as a paid companion while she enjoyed wealth and status. The architecture of murder. You discovered this truth last year, Poirot said, his voice softening slightly with what might have been compassion. Lady Ravenscroft promised to acknowledge you in her will, to give you your rightful place in the family. But then Andre appeared, demanding his own recognition. Suddenly there was a new will leaving everything to him. Nothing for you, nothing for Edward, nothing for the family that had actually remained loyal. Miss Hartley's voice came out as barely a whisper. She promised. For 10 years, I managed her correspondence, kept her secrets, lived on wages like a common servant. When I finally found the courage to reveal who I really was, she promised to make it right. But the appearance of Andre changed everything, Poirot observed. You realize that legitimizing one secret child would make it far more difficult to acknowledge another. In your desperation and resentment, you conceived a plan of extraordinary complexity. He began to pace slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. You knew about the paste replicas from managing Sir Marcus's correspondence. You understood that the planned insurance fraud would provide perfect cover for a more deadly deception. You forged the notes that summoned Mademoiselle Harcourt and Monsieur Grant to the gamekeeper's cottage, removing potential witnesses who knew too much about family affairs. The method revealed. The young servant Thomas was drugged with chloral hydrate from Dr. Carey's medical supplies. You had access to the doctor's bag during his many visits. You planted the pearl button, torn from Mademoiselle Harcourt's glove, created the muddy footprints to suggest flight, even hid the garden door key in Monsieur Grant's cigarette case. Dr. Carey started in his chair. My medical bag, I noticed items had been disturbed, but I assumed... You assumed nothing suspicious because you trusted Miss Hartley implicitly, Poirot finished. As did we all. The perfect position for a killer. Invisible, trusted, with access to every secret and every room in the house. He turned back to Miss Hartley, whose composure had completely shattered. When the lights failed, a failure you had arranged by tampering with the fuse box hours earlier, you struck Lady Ravenscroft with a marble bookend wrapped in her own evening gloves to muffle the sound. The blow was calculated to cause unconsciousness, not immediate death. You needed time to establish your alibi and plant evidence. The tragic misunderstanding. Lady Diana's voice cut through the heavy silence, weak but clear. I was going to acknowledge you, Vivian. The revelation I planned for tonight included both my children, Andre and you. The new will was temporary, meant only to protect Andre legally until I could arrange proper recognition for both of you. The words hit Miss Hartley like physical blows. Her face crumpled as the full weight of her error became apparent. She had attempted to murder her own sister based on incomplete information, her desperation and years of resentment blinding her to the truth. You see the tragedy, mes amis, Poirot said softly. A crime born not of greed, but of love perverted by secrecy and misunderstanding. Had there been trust instead of deception, honesty instead of hidden shame, none of this need have happened. The final evidence, the paste necklace, he concluded, was taken merely to complete the illusion of theft. You hid it in the gamekeeper's cottage, planning to discover it later as evidence against the supposed external thieves. But you made one crucial error. In your haste to remove Lady Ravenscroft's gloves, which bore traces of the marble dust from your weapon, you left behind red wax from the seal of the chloral hydrate bottle. This substance, found beneath her fingernails, could only have come from medical supplies you had accessed hours earlier. Miss Hartley made no attempt to deny the accusations. Her body seemed to collapse inward, as though the weight of her guilt had finally broken her spirit entirely. I served her faithfully for 10 years, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. 10 years of watching her squander our father's legacy while I lived in the shadows. When I thought she meant to give everything to Andre while keeping me hidden forever, I couldn't bear it. Justice and resolution. The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of the local constabulary, summoned by Jameson at Poirot's earlier instruction. As Miss Hartley was gently but firmly taken into custody, Lady Diana struggled to rise from her couch. "Vivian," she called out, her voice breaking, "I never meant... If you had only trusted me..." But Miss Hartley did not look back as she was led away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs for the sister she'd tried to kill and the future they might have shared. Poirot's reflection, as the room slowly emptied and the drama of Ravenscroft Manor began its transition from crisis to healing, Poirot stood alone before the fireplace, contemplating the paste jewels that lay forgotten in their velvet case. Paste or priceless, he murmured to the empty air. Jewels are but stones. It is the human heart, mes amis, that commits the true extravagances of love, of fear, of desperate hope. These cannot be insured against loss, nor can they be replaced when broken. He straightened his waistcoat with characteristic precision and moved toward the door. Outside, the storm clouds had finally dispersed, revealing a clear autumn sky that promised better days ahead. The mystery of the Red Duchess jewels was solved, but the work of rebuilding trust and healing old wounds had only just begun, as Hercule Poirot's small figure disappeared down the gravel drive. Ravenscroft Manor settled into an uneasy peace, forever changed by the night when family secrets had erupted into violence, and the truth had finally emerged from its hiding place in the shadows of the human heart. The little grey cells had once again triumphed, but their victory, as always, came at the cost of human tragedy, a reminder that justice, while necessary, could never fully repair the damage wrought by deception and despair. The pale autumn sun that broke through the dissipating storm clouds seemed to wash Ravenscroft Manor clean, its golden light streaming through the tall windows to illuminate rooms that had witnessed such darkness only hours before. The oppressive atmosphere of secrecy and deception had lifted like fog, leaving behind the quieter but more hopeful work of healing and reconciliation. Lady Diana Ravenscroft, propped against silk pillows in her bedroom, looked fragile but resolute as she dictated telegrams to the village postmaster. "Send immediately to Andre Valdez at the Swan Inn," she instructed, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Come home, my son. It is time." Edward sat beside her, no longer the resentful stepson, but a young man sobered by revelation and ready to embrace an unexpected brother. The inheritance that had seemed so crucial now mattered far less than the family bonds that could finally be acknowledged. Poirot found himself in the entrance hall, methodically arranging his departure while observing the subtle transformations already taking place around him. Sir Marcus Thornbury approached with the velvet pouch containing the genuine Red Duchess stones, his usual commercial calculation replaced by something approaching conscience. "The insurance matter will be handled discreetly," he assured Poirot. "The proceeds from selling the genuine stones should clear Diana's debts entirely, with enough remaining for Miss Hartley's legal defence. It seems appropriate." "Indeed," Poirot replied, his green eyes thoughtful. "Let the Red Duchess provide one final service to her granddaughters, both the acknowledged and the denied." Dr. Carey emerged from Diana's room, his medical bag packed and his conscience clearly troubled. "I failed to see the signs," he murmured. 10 years of treating Diana's nervous complaints, and I never suspected their true cause, the weight of hidden children, denied recognition. "You treated the symptoms, Doctor," Poirot observed gently. "But some wounds lie too deep for medicine to reach. They require truth as their physician." Celia Harcourt and Lionel Grant, their own ordeal in the gamekeeper's cottage, now revealed as an elaborate misdirection, stood together near the morning room. Their false imprisonment had served its purpose in Vivian's desperate plan, but their survival bore witness to the fact that even in her extremity, the woman had retained some vestige of humanity. "Will she be shown mercy?" Celia asked quietly, her voice carrying genuine concern for the half-sister whose existence had remained hidden even from her. "The courts will judge her actions," Poirot replied, "but perhaps Lady Ravenscroft's acknowledgement and support will provide what Mademoiselle Hartley sought most desperately: recognition, legitimacy, a place in the family she served so faithfully while being denied her birthright." As Jameson opened the great oak door, admitting the clean, storm-washed air, Poirot gathered his hat and walking stick with characteristic precision. The motor car waited in the gravel drive, its engine purring softly in the afternoon stillness. Lady Diana appeared at the top of the staircase, supported by Edward's arm, but determined to see her saviour properly departed. "How can we thank you, Monsieur Poirot? You have given us back not just our lives, but our chance to be a real family." "I have merely returned to you the truth, madame," Poirot replied with a formal bow. "It is a sharp gift, often painful to hold, but it is the only foundation upon which lasting happiness can be built. The little grey cells, they insist upon it." He paused at the threshold, his moustaches twitching slightly as he surveyed the assembled household one final time. "Remember, mes amis, that the jewels which caused such anguish were merely stones, beautiful, valuable, but ultimately lifeless. The true treasures are the bonds of family, which, though more easily broken, are infinitely more precious when genuine." With that characteristic precision of movement, Hercule Poirot descended the steps and settled into the waiting motor car. As it pulled away down the tree-lined drive, he reflected on the curious mathematics of human nature, how decades of accumulated lies had nearly destroyed what a single moment of truth had begun to heal. The case was closed, filed away in the orderly chambers of his remarkable mind. Yet, as the great house disappeared behind the autumn trees, Poirot allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Justice had been served, but more importantly, mercy had been given its chance. The Red Duchess would rest easier now, knowing her legacy had finally brought not division, but reconciliation to the family that bore her name. The little grey cells, having completed their work, settled into peaceful contemplation as the countryside rolled past. Another mystery solved, another family saved from the consequences of its own secrets. It was, Poirot reflected, a most satisfactory conclusion to a most complex affair. The familiar geometry of Whitehaven mansions provided a welcome contrast to the Gothic complexities of Ravenscroft Manor. Hercule Poirot sat in his precisely arranged sitting room, the morning light filtering through spotless windows to illuminate a small stack of correspondence that had arrived with the early post. His valet, George, had arranged the letters with mathematical precision beside a cup of chocolate that steamed at exactly the optimal temperature. The first envelope bore the Ravenscroft crest, its heavy cream paper speaking of traditions that had survived revolution, scandal, and near destruction. Lady Diana's handwriting, though still bearing traces of her recent ordeal, conveyed news that brought a satisfied twitch to Poirot's moustaches. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," the letter began, "I write to inform you that the healing you made possible continues, though slowly. Andre arrived yesterday and has proven himself a man of extraordinary grace. Rather than claiming his full inheritance, he has insisted on sharing it equally among all the Red Duchess's grandchildren, Edward, Vivian, and himself. I sought a mother, not a fortune, he told us, and his generosity has shamed us all into better angels." Poirot nodded approvingly. The young man had shown wisdom beyond his years, understanding that true wealth lay not in rubies and diamonds, but in the bonds of family honestly acknowledged. The letter continued with updates that painted a picture of gradual reconciliation. Edward had abandoned his dissolute habits, finding purpose in managing the estate, now freed from crushing debt. The genuine stones of the Red Duchess collection had been sold discreetly through Sir Marcus's connections, their proceeds clearing all debts, while leaving sufficient funds for a comfortable future. Vivian has been sentenced to treatment rather than imprisonment. Diana wrote, her script growing steadier as she proceeded. The court recognized the extreme psychological duress under which she acted, and the years of denial that drove her to such desperation. She's receiving care at a private sanatorium in Switzerland, paid for by our family. I visit when I'm able. It is difficult, but necessary. She's my sister after all, and I bear responsibility for the secrecy that nearly destroyed us both. A second telegram, delivered that afternoon, provided additional details. Celia has accepted position teaching languages at local school. Grant remains as estate manager, both freed by truth from lives they never chose. The pace necklace donated to Drury Lane Theatre, fitting in for such elaborate performance. All sends gratitude. Diana. Setting down the correspondence, Poirot rose and moved to his mantelpiece, adjusting a small ornament by a microscopic degree. The little grey cells had performed their function with characteristic precision, but the case had revealed truths that extended far beyond the mechanics of crime and detection. At that moment, Captain Hastings entered, bearing the afternoon newspapers. "I say, Poirot, the papers are full of this Ravenscroft business, though they seem to have missed the real story entirely." "Naturally, mon ami," Poirot replied, accepting the papers with a slight smile. "The press seeks sensation, stolen jewels, aristocratic scandal, mysterious attacks in country houses. They have no interest in the deeper truths." "And what truth is that?" Poirot moved to the window, gazing out at the ordered streets of London, where life proceeded with comforting regularity. "That the human heart, Hastings, is capable of extraordinary contradictions. Love and hatred, loyalty and betrayal, hope and despair, all existing simultaneously within the same breast. Mademoiselle Hartley served her sister faithfully for 10 years, while harbouring the seeds of violence. Lady Ravenscroft protected her children by denying them. The Red Duchess herself fled revolution with stolen jewels, creating a legacy of deception that echoed across generations." "Rather a grim view of human nature," Hastings observed. "On the contrary," Poirot replied, his green eyes brightening, "it is ultimately hopeful, for if the human heart is capable of such contradictions, it is also capable of redemption. The Ravenscroft family has chosen reconciliation over revenge, healing over hatred. André Valdez could have claimed everything. Instead, he chose to share. Lady Diana could have abandoned Vivian to her fate. Instead, she visits the sanatorium. Edward could have resented his newfound brother. Instead, he welcomes him." He returned to his chair, settling himself with characteristic precision. "The jewels were merely stones, Hastings, beautiful, valuable, but ultimately lifeless. The true treasure was always the possibility of honest connection, unburdened by the weight of accumulated secrets. That treasure was nearly lost, but it has been recovered." "And the Red Duchess herself? What would she have made of all this chaos her jewels caused?" Poirot considered this question with the gravity it deserved. "Perhaps she would have understood better than most. A woman who lived through revolution, who knew the weight of choices that echo across generations, who carried secrets that shaped destinies. Yes, I believe she would have approved of the final outcome. Her jewels have served their ultimate purpose, not as objects of beauty or symbols of wealth, but as catalysts for truth." The clock on the mantel chimed the hour with orderly precision, its sound marking not merely the passage of time, but the completion of another chapter in the ongoing human drama that provided endless fascination for the little grey cells. Justice had been served, tempered with mercy. Truth had triumphed over deception. Order had been restored from chaos. "The case is closed, mon ami," Poirot announced with quiet satisfaction. "The Red Duchess may rest in peace, knowing that her legacy has finally brought not division, but reconciliation to the family that bears her name. It is, as you English say, a most satisfactory conclusion." Outside, London continued its eternal dance of commerce and civilization, while within the precise confines of Whitehaven mansions, Hercule Poirot contemplated the curious mathematics of human nature, how decades of accumulated lies had nearly destroyed what a single moment of courage had begun to heal. The little grey cells, having completed their intricate work, settled into peaceful contemplation, ready for whatever mysteries the future might bring. For in a world where human hearts harboured such complex contradictions, there would always be puzzles to solve, truths to uncover, and order to restore from the beautiful, terrible chaos of human passion. And wherever such mysteries arose, Hercule Poirot would be ready, with his moustaches waxed to perfection and his faith in logic unshakable, to ensure that justice and truth would ultimately prevail.